Good evening and welcome to New Foundation Unity. This evening is the first in a series of 6, entitled Journey to the Promised Land. This is the story in Exodus, which is the story of Moses and the phases of development, which we will go into detail this evening. Just before we begin, I would like to make this announcement that there may not, but there may be a class on Maundy Thursday. I'm not yet sure what I'll be called to do that evening, but the rest of the Thursdays, there will be 6 of them. We will cover this course. So as we begin our time together, I invite you to close your eyes and allow the words of Charles Fillmore's invocation to flow in you, through you, and over you. If you know the invocation and you would like to speak it along with me, feel free to do so. And so now, as we close our eyes, let us enter into that realm of pure being. I am now in the presence of pure being. Immersed in the Holy Spirit of life, love, and wisdom. I acknowledge thy presence and thy power, O blessed Spirit. In thy divine wisdom, I erase my mortal limitations, and from thy pure substance of love, I bring my world into manifestation according to thy perfect law. So let us take some few minutes now to experience that state of pure being that lies within us in the silence. Let us feel the presence and acknowledge that point of pure power in the silence. And as we begin to return our attention to this time and this place, we remember that we are always in the presence of pure being. But now we become conscious of it and become wiser, more understanding, more loving as a result. Know that in the silence, both our error thinking is released, and at the same time, we are able to bring forth those qualities from the source of life, love, and wisdom. And for an awareness of this truth, we do give thanks in the name and through the power of that living, loving Christ that lives within us all. Amen. One thing that Charles Fillmore said about the Bible, and I like to repeat this at the beginning of all of the Bible classes, and that is that in order to fully get the meaning of the principles behind the words in the Bible, we have to be in that consciousness of the authors of that passage. That being said, we then can become fluent in the language of the soul, which is our metaphysical language, and which I hope you are becoming more familiar with. Right away, we find that the Exodus, which is the second book of our Bible, and it's also the second book of the Torah, or the Pentateuch, that being the 5 books of law: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And it is easily the most important book in terms of Jewish history, in terms of Jewish religion. Moses is the big hero. We know what a hero he was when we read the Gospel of Matthew, because everything that Moses did, as Matthew would point out in his agenda, Jesus did better. Moses was in Egypt. Jesus was taken to Egypt to avoid being killed by the king. Right? Never mind that it didn't happen historically, but it was to demonstrate that, you know how great Moses was? Well, Jesus was even greater, and that's why we call him the Messiah. This is what Matthew says. Moses was 40 years in the wilderness. Jesus was 40 days in the wilderness. And this is what is called parallel construction in the Bible. And if you have the Harper Study Bible, Revised Standard Version, on the side you have the references that go to all other parts of the Bible where you can see that that particular theme is mentioned. Okay. So Moses is important. But what about Genesis? Genesis, the beginning. Genesis you can think of as a kind of prologue that somehow leads up to the point of the Exodus where the Israelites are freed from the bondage in Egypt. It's like if you are at a transition point in your life, you're ready to make a big change, then you look back on your life and you say, how did I get here? And that's exactly what's happening here. They looked back on their past, and somehow they had to get the Israelites to Egypt. And so they did. Now, Exodus is about the gaining of an understanding of spiritual law. But an understanding of law is not enough to get us into the promised land. But that was the stage that Moses represents. In Genesis, the law, and when I say law, I'm talking about what we call in unity the law of mind action. Thoughts held in mind produce after their kind. It's known also as the law of cause and effect. This is very important to understand this because it saves us from being a victim. We may not be in touch with the original event that set things into motion. But if we understand the law, we know that anything that comes to us by way of effect had a cause. The law was not revealed to Abraham. As you recall, when we were studying the allegories of Genesis, that Abraham was sustained through faith. Abraham represented faith, and like many of us, he went through many sort of fluctuations in his faith, but overall, I think we can say that because he was willing to sacrifice his son Isaac, he passed the test of faith. Following Abraham, there was Isaac. We didn't focus so much on Isaac, but the experiences of Isaac and Jacob deepened that experience of faith. Isaac was the guy who had trouble with the Philistines, who kept covering up the wells that were dug. And instead of fighting the Philistines, Isaac simply opened up another well. And then the Philistines would cover it over, and then Isaac would open up another well. And finally, after 3 times this happened, the Philistines came to Isaac and offered to make peace. That law of non-resistance is something, that perseverance and non-resistance is something that deepens our faith. Jacob, we studied Jacob in our last series, Relationships in the Bible. And Jacob underwent a change of consciousness when he got his name changed to Israel. That was after he wrestled with that problem of having to face his brother Esau. He wrestled all night. And he would not let that problem go until he received a blessing. And so he made peace with his brother Esau. That's a deepening of faith to have an experience like that. And then Joseph, of course. Joseph sold into slavery by his brothers. Joseph representing imagination. Winds up in Egypt, second in command to Pharaoh, and actually becomes the one who saves his brothers, the very ones that sold him into slavery, his father. All of Israel comes down to Egypt because of the famine that Joseph predicted through his capacity to interpret dreams. That's how they got to Egypt. And the Exodus begins when the Israelites have been in Egypt for 400 years. I want to emphasize the importance of numbers. 4 represents a foundation. 40 emphasizes the strength of that foundation. And 400, that is an incredible jump. And in this case, being in a place of security and safety and prosperity for too long has them stuck. Perhaps you can think of a time in your life when you became a slave to what was originally your lifeline. Sometimes it's a job, sometimes it's a person, sometimes it's a belief system. And in this case, Abraham, who was the founder, the father of Judaism and Christianity and Islam, faith, we have the capacity to direct that faith outward or inward. And while it was originally inward with Abraham, over time, because they got so comfortable and so prosperous in Egypt, that faith became centered in outer appearances, in outer phenomenon, in outer conditions. And the Pharaoh, at the opening of the Exodus, he had no clue who Joseph even was. Joseph, who said to his brothers, "You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good." So here we are in Egypt, and that's the scenario. The Hebrews were very numerous. Remember that instruction back in Genesis? Be fruitful and multiply? Well, they did. And they were so numerous and so prosperous that the Egyptians were afraid of them, which is why all the children, at first only the sons, and then when the midwives disobeyed the order, even the daughters were being killed at birth. So that was a kind of dangerous scenario in which Moses was born. Starting with chapter 2, we have what is called the first 40 years. 40, here's that number 40, which is a number of preparation, and this is the preparation for physical and intellectual development. Moses had a wonder birth, and that wonder birth is described in chapter 2. I hope you have your Bibles with you. I only got a chance to put one of the handouts on the website, but chapter 2, verses 1 through 10, here is the description of the birth, 11 through 15. No, I was right the first time. Chapter 2, verses 1 through 10 is a description of Moses' birth. He was a wonder child. All right, it was a wonder birth. You know he's going to be a hero, because here are all the Hebrew children being killed, and Moses was put in a basket and set afloat on the Nile. And who rescued him? Pharaoh's daughter. His own mother nursed him. And then in verse 10, he was raised as Pharaoh's daughter's son. He was a prince of Egypt. And as a prince in Egypt, he had all the benefits of royalty. He had the best education. And that included magic, alchemy. He was a magician, as you will see later on when he receives his calling. When we go on to verses 11 through 15, here's what we find. That here, in a very comfortable situation, you can't stay stuck. You are not allowed to stay in one place where there is no growth. Growth is built in to the nature of life. And so one day, Moses sees an Egyptian beating a Hebrew. And he goes, and it says in the text, he kills the Egyptian. And when he sees that no one is looking, he buries that Egyptian in the sand. So now that is a literal description of what happened. But metaphysically, what can we say about this? When we sense in ourselves that that we are in bondage, we want to suppress it. Sometimes we suppress it. Buried in the sand in Egypt representing the subconscious, as well as a materialistic center. Can anything be buried in the subconscious? Well, it can be buried, but it will come out. And as it does in the next scene, where Moses sees two Hebrews in conflict with one another. And he goes up to the one who is the wrongdoer, and he says, "Stop doing that." And the reply is, "Oh, so are you going to do to us what you did to that Egyptian?" And then he realizes that he becomes afraid, and he realizes that his ego has been making a judgment here, and he has to flee, and he goes to Midian. And this begins the second phase. I hope you can see this. I have written the 3 phases of the preparation, 3 phases of preparation for Moses completing his mission. And as I said, the first 40 years were in Egypt, physical and intellectual development that prepared him for the next stage, which is developing an understanding of the law. And this is called the Midian phase. Midian means good governance, good judgment. We learn in this phase, this is what Moses learned, that he's herding sheep in Midian. It's a kind of wilderness. He's herding sheep for his future father-in-law, Jethro. And herding sheep means that we are managing our thinking process, where we learn to have good judgment. Yes to truth, no to error thinking. He marries Jethro's daughter, who is the 4th, here's the number 4 again, child of Abraham and Keturah. Keturah was his second wife after Sarah died. Okay, so that is the product of faith and good judgment, righteous judgment. We read, and this all begins to happen in chapter 3. One day, Moses goes in the direction of Horeb. Horeb means solitude. It's also the name of Mount Sinai, which is where the law was given. That's the second great event of the Exodus. One, the freeing of the Israelites from slavery, and two, the giving of the law. So he is out on that outer wilderness, and he comes to Mount Horeb, that place of solitude. In the silence of our being is where we make that connection with the truth, with the source, a direct connection to the Creator. This is found in the beginning of chapter 3, and here he is herding the flock, managing his thoughts and feelings. Now Moses was keeping the flock of his father-in-law, Jethro, the priest of Midian, and he led his flock to the west side of the wilderness, that's in the back of the wilderness, and came to Horeb, the mountain of God, of the midst of a bush. And he looked, and the angel of the Lord, okay, he's receiving divine guidance, appeared to him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. What is that bush? The bush represents thoughts, feelings, and intellect, everything that pertains to the human nervous system. And when there's a great infusion of light, of consciousness into the nervous system, that connection is made. And Moses looked, and lo, the bush was burning, yet it was not consumed. Okay, that is the fire of God. When you are truly in your spiritual calling, you are never depleted. But when you are fighting yourself, doing things that are not really yours to do, it's very depleting. I have known many who have been enslaved by their work, workaholics who burn out. But when you are doing work that you love, you are following the guidance and being in the place where you are supposed to be, there is no depletion, no loss of energy. And that is what the bush, the fire, not being consumed. It does not diminish within you. And of course, there are lots of references to fire in both the Old and the New Testament. Fire always representing the presence of God, which is also very purifying, which is why Moses hid his face. It goes on, and he looked, and lo, the bush was burning, yet it was not consumed. And Moses said, I will turn aside and see this great sight, why the bush is not burned. In other words, this caught Moses' attention. When the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, God called to him out of the bush, Moses, Moses. All right? He's being called. His name means drawn from the water. Okay. Water has many metaphysical meanings. It means both possibilities and it means negativity. And in a situation of negativity, there are many possibilities. That was the situation in Egypt. But here he is being called by name, Moses, Moses, drawn from the water. And Moses says, here am I. Then he said, "Do not come near. Put off your shoes from your feet." Now, we're not talking about sandals or any kind of footwear. We're talking about understanding. Let go of that understanding that you have. And for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. Does that remind you of Jacob when he had the vision of the ladder going up to heaven and coming down? And when he awoke in the morning, he said, "Surely the presence of the Lord is in this place, and I knew it not." Well, here Moses is acknowledging, he is receiving the guidance that he is standing on holy ground. And he said, this is the bush speaking, "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. Too powerful for him to look at face to face. Then the Lord said, "I have seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt, and have heard their cry because of their taskmasters." All right? The Lord wants all people to be free from bondage. That's one message he gets from the bush here. And the bush goes on. "I have heard their cry because of their taskmasters. I know their sufferings, and I have come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of the land to a good and broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey." All right, second message, the land of milk and honey. That's the promised land. God is saying all good has already been prepared for you. So first, I want you to be free from all limitation. I want all people to be free, and all need to know that this land of milk and honey, of infinite good, is already prepared for you. Okay. To the place of the Canaanites. It was Canaan. And the interesting thing is that Canaan is a lowland. And it's a valley, which is surprising because usually high consciousness is a mountain. But the consciousness has to come through us and lift up these valleys. The Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hittites, and the Jebusites. And now, behold, the cry of the people of Israel has come to me, and I have seen the oppression with which the Egyptians oppress them. Come, I will send you to Pharaoh. Pharaoh, like all kings, represents the personal will, the egotistical will, that you may bring forth my people, the sons of Israel, out of Egypt. Okay, he's giving Moses a task here. But Moses said to God, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the sons of Israel out of Egypt?" He said, "But I will be with you." Important line. "And this shall be the sign for you that I have sent you. When you have brought forth the people out of Egypt, you shall serve God from the mountain." Okay, that will be the sign. Then Moses said to God, "If I come to the people of Israel and say to them, "The God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, 'What is his name?' What shall I say to them?" You know the answer to that. God said to Moses, "I am who I am." And he said, "Say this to the people of Israel, 'I am has sent me to you.' And this is my name forever and ever. Throughout, and I am to be remembered throughout all generations." Do we always remember the I of us is that connection to the source, that it's our connection to God, and what we speak in the name of I am is to be remembered for generations? I think we often have to bring ourselves back to that truth. The I of us is not to be linked with anything that we would not link it with God. So it's not a good idea to link it to sickness, poverty, limitation of any kind. And yet, out of sort of habit, we frequently find ourselves doing that. All right. Right. "And I promise you, I will bring you out of the afflictions of Egypt." When we are stuck in a consciousness of materiality, we undergo afflictions in the form of sickness, of poverty, of limitation of all kind. And let's see. And so he even, the bush, still speaking here, God still speaking, gives Moses a plan. And he says, go to Pharaoh and tell him you just want 3 days to take your people out of Egypt into the desert to worship and make a sacrifice. Well, Pharaoh doesn't go for that, of course. You know, we often try to get out of a situation, and it doesn't always happen the first time. Have you noticed that? That you decide on a spiritual path, and then, whoops, I'm not sure I can do this. At the sign of the first challenge, I don't know, maybe this is too hard. I don't have time to meditate. You know, all the excuses. Nobody's going to believe me. I am slow of speech. Send my brother Aaron. And he actually does have Aaron. Moses voices all of his doubts. These are the kinds of doubts we have along the way. Have you ever wished that you had never started on the spiritual path, because it is one tough life if you are really doing it. If you're doing it casually, you will get very casual results. But if you really take it seriously, you are going to have purification, and the purification is not always comfortable. We call it chemicalization. And so Aaron and Moses go to Pharaoh. Now, the Lord shows Moses some magic tricks. The Egyptians were very schooled in alchemy and they could do all kinds of magic. And so he shows him, he says, "Where's your rod?" Rod is a symbol of authority. He says, "Throw it down on the ground." And when he does, it turns into a snake. And he says, "Now, pick up the snake by the tail." And he does that, and it turns back into a rod. And then he says, "Take your hand and put it in your bosom." And his hand turns white with leprosy. And then he says, "Take your hand out." And then it's restored. So this is how healing and true power is accompanied. The Lord is giving him quite deliberate, precise instructions about how to proceed. All right, so here we are. This second phase, the phase of Midian, which is the phase of gaining an understanding of spiritual law. This is his spiritual development, herding a flock, and he's fruitful. He marries Keturah and raises a family. And the burning bush, it's stated clearly in chapter 3, verse 14. "I am has sent me." He receives his calling, lead the Israelites out of Egypt into Canaan, the land of milk and honey. 2, "I am" is the awareness of the pure being that is within you in the silence. And the self-doubt, "I am" invokes spiritually centered confidence. So when you have doubts, then you invoke that I am. I am in a place of pure power. I am poised and confident in doing the work that I am called to do. And so you affirm using that I am to give you the confidence, the courage to move through those doubts. That's what is found in this chapter. All right, so you know the story of how Pharaoh first agrees, and then he changes his mind. "Let my people go." "No." "Let my people go." "No." Well, so there are these plagues. All right, now these plagues, Charles Fillmore says, these plagues are all natural events, but what makes them supernatural is that Moses predicted them and the timing of them, which was exactly to fit the needs of the Israelites at that time. So I'm going to go through the plagues that were brought upon the Egyptians, trying to persuade Pharaoh to let the people go. He's reluctant to let them go because they're his slaves, and they are very burdened. He has them working hard. Each day, they were like forced laborers, slaves. But he becomes increasingly fearful of these plagues that are intensifying. So I will read you a list of them. One thing that might be puzzling to people is that right after Pharaoh gives these instructions to Aaron, he decides to harden Pharaoh's heart. Now, why would God tell him to go to Pharaoh and then harden Pharaoh's heart? That represents our capacity of choice. We can say yes and we can say no. We can offer resistance to divine guidance. Have you ever done that? Have you ever tried that? Offering resistance, you find, brings on all kinds of pain and suffering. And that's exactly what is happening here. So the first plague, the water of the Nile turns red with blood. I have heard one scholar at least say that this could have been caused by the red algae in the Nile when the flood waters recede. But it stands here metaphysically for the stagnation of life. You know, the water turning to blood, red, and nobody can drink it. All right, and the second plague is frogs. These stagnant pools of water are breeding grounds for frogs to hatch their eggs in. And the gnats come next. Charles Fillmore says it's more likely mosquitoes that breed in pools of stagnant water. And then comes the flies that feast on the piles of dead frogs. And the disease kills the cattle. Flies bring disease. The disease kills the cattle. They were turned out to graze, and they, after the floods receded, and they ate this grass that was already contaminated. And then the flies are responsible for the sickness of people, and there's a description of boils. And then there's the hailstorm, number 7, anger, thunder, lightning. That's what we're under, a storm warning here tonight. Of thunder and lightning and a tornado watch. And then the locusts. The locusts that were blown in by the east wind, they form like a kind of dark blanket. And so there are 3 days of darkness, a blinding sandstorm. And all of these 9 plagues, you know, Pharaoh doesn't give in. Let my people go. No, let my people go. No. He says yes, and then he says no, and then he says yes. We're kind of like that. We want the spiritual benefits, and no, it's too hard. This kind of inner dialogue is going on all the time. And then we come to the most serious plague, which is the death of the firstborn. In Egypt, the king's son was considered divine. The pharaohs ruled by divine right, and metaphysically cut off from the eternal source. That's a serious plague. And we have the ability to resist growth, and we often do. But then the conflict after conflict resulting in suffering until there's a kind of rock bottom, and this is it, the 10th plague. And this is the origin of the Passover. The Israelites were given instructions, and the Passover is found in we have all these gnats. Death of the firstborn is chapter 11. And then, of course, you know your numbers, the importance of 12. Chapter 12, the institution of the Passover. Passover represents a passing over from human consciousness into spiritual consciousness. Literally, it was that the plague passed over the Israelites and killed all the Egyptians. The Passover, the instructions that were given to the Israelites were that they were to kill a lamb and use the blood. They were to take the blood, take a stick of hyssop. Hyssop is a plant that is considered to be a universal purifier, a very important herb. And so what happens is that when they dipped the stick of hyssop in the lamb's blood, they then struck it. And only King James Version has this verb struck. That's important because the striking of it released the essential oil that was contained in it and kept the door, that is the entryway, the portal, free from the plague, so that the plague could not come in. This is memorialized every year still. Jewish tradition, the Passover, a holy day that memorializes this crossing over from the bondage of human consciousness to the liberation that follows. So you can read about that in chapter 12. Okay, today what they do is they still, alas, kill a lamb, roast and eat it with bitter herbs. Actually, maybe they just use a lamb shank. We're not sure. And then this is where the third phase of Moses' life begins. This is the beginning of the journey into the wilderness. Right up to the Red Sea, though Pharaoh, even though he has let the people go, he has a change of heart and he follows them right up until the last minute. Maybe I don't really want to do this. And if you ever saw the movie with Charlton Heston, you know that the Egyptians come galloping up on their horses, chasing these Israelites who are coming up against the Red Sea. The Red Sea represents all of the thoughts, feelings, emotions, all kinds of limitations, conscious, subconscious, and they think that they've got them captured. However, here's where Moses uses his magic to tap the waters and walks across in dry land. Now, there are lots of partings of the water. And again, if you look at the Harper Study Bible, you will find other passages in the Bible where we see parting of the waters, or we see plagues, or we see God functioning as fire. So I'm going to pause for just a moment and review our cast of characters here. Please, I hope you can see this. So here are our cast of characters, starting with Egypt, that represents a number of things, but it represents, it's from the Hebrew, That means misery, tribulation, and distress. It is also the realm of substance in the depths of body consciousness, the darkness of ignorance, but it is essential for survival. That's from the Metaphysical Bible Dictionary. And third, it is the subconscious mind. Pharaoh, second in our cast of characters, is the king of Egypt on the first level. Second, rules the solar plexus. That's right here. The sun center of the subconscious mind. And it is the self-centered ego which rules the subconscious mind. So that's Egypt and Pharaoh. Then we have Moses drawn from the water. We've already talked about that. And the Israelites, the children of Israel, namely Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel. Israel from Hebrew meaning striving for God, prevailing with God, a prince with God, dominion with God. Also, and this is from Charles Fillmore, the illumined thoughts in consciousness undergoing spiritual discipline. This is also Charles Fillmore. Israelites symbolize all that constitutes our willingness to become illumined by the light of spiritual truth, all that is willing to be part of our progress into greater consciousness. So the Israelites, think of them as consciousness unfolding. Okay, and then Aaron was mentioned. He is to become the high priest. He's Moses' brother. And I named one of my sons Aaron because of this meaning: illumined, enlightener, mountaineer, very lofty. He was the first. He is to become the first high priest of Israel. And it is the executive power of divine law and the ruling power of the intellect. The other character I would like to mention, which isn't really a character, but it is the number 40. Where's mine? So this is just to review the 3 phases of preparation. First, the Egyptian phase, the intellectual and physical preparation for Moses to receive an understanding of the law. Then we have the second phase in Midian, where that's the spiritual preparation, his experience with the burning bush, that prepares him for his calling, his mission, the 40 years leading the Israelites through the wilderness. And there are many, many experiences in the wilderness. That is just the beginning of his ministry, we could say. This whole chapter is so rich in symbolism, but 40 is important because 4 is preparation through the establishment of a foundation. 4 square, right? The 0 emphasizes the strength of the foundation that is being established, 40. Each of the 3 phases of Moses' life symbolize a phase of spiritual preparation and development. Moses lived 120 years, symbolizing the complete fulfillment of his mission. And you say, oh, but he didn't get to go into the promised land. No, because the consciousness that got stuck in materiality, that consciousness that created the difficulty, is never the consciousness that can solve the difficulty. Now, even though he is fulfilling his mission was to lead the people to the promised land, where he could look into the promised land, but it took another state of consciousness, Joshua, whose name means the same as Jesus, Elisha, Elijah, all of that, the same thing. God is salvation. Interesting. So Moses did his job, which was to lead people through. He understood God as principle, and the principle works out through law. I'm going to pause here because I've been talking a lot. It's 8 o'clock, and this is the time that I usually allow for people to call in. And so I would like to remind you that if you would like to call in, the phone number is 816. Just a moment. I have to remember it. It's on your screen, but 6304 816. Oh my. It's been a long time since I've broadcast, and I haven't said it. Okay, give me a moment, and I will hope to do better. If any of you remember it from before, or if any of you are seeing it on the screen and you have a question or a comment, I would be happy to hear it. If anyone would like to call in and tell me the number, like Mark, if you happen to be listening, that would be helpful. Also, I would like to suggest to each of you that to get the most out of this, not only read the whole passage. Hi, Bob.
Hi, Eleanor. The number is area code 816-301-6304.
It's the 301. Thank you. It's the 301 that I forgot. So thank you.
Right.
816.
Well,
Yes.
We'll let you go because you've done such a great job tonight. I have a couple questions here.
Okay.
The first, would you review, or maybe for others who don't know, I'm familiar with alchemy, but when you were talking about Moses was trained in magic and alchemy, how would you define alchemy?
Okay. Alchemy originally was the search. It was very popular in the Middle Ages. It was a form of magic, and it was a search for something called the Philosopher's Stone, which could turn base metal into gold. All right. And
yeah, that's right. Yeah.
There are stories about that. But metaphysically, alchemy is that which transmutes human consciousness into spiritual consciousness. And so the Egyptians did a lot of that. And I'm trying to think, there's a passage in Numbers, and because I wasn't planning to talk about this, I don't have the exact reference. But there was a little alchemy there because the people, this is one of the passages. It's either in Deuteronomy or Numbers, and I apologize for not having a better frame of reference. But what happens is there are all these people are getting bitten by snakes, and so always when there's a difficulty, Moses goes to the Lord, all right, and says, "What shall I do about this?" And so he gets the reply: make essentially a fake snake, all right? In other words, make a snake out of, I think they made it out of copper, because they had a lot of metal with them. And then he said the snakes had already killed a whole bunch of people. And so all the people who had been bitten by snakes, but who were still alive, were to look at this fake snake, all right? And then they would be healed. And which is an amazing piece of metaphysical alchemy, because if you have in front of you an illusion of a snake, it's not a real snake, then having the illusion removed is how you are healed from the false belief that you've been killed by the snake. It's a very interesting passage, and I promise you I will look up the reference to that. But it's one of the most amazing human feats of alchemy, is that when we see that what we're believing is an illusion, then we are healed from it. And you know, remember. Well, and the other example I want.
Remembering from Genesis, the snake represented, if I remember correctly, sense consciousness, or
right.
Am I
correct? Worldly a desire for worldly experience, which is very necessary because
I can't hear you.
The snake in Genesis refers. Are you still there, Bob?
Your call has been forwarded to an
So if you don't call back, I'll answer it anyway. The snake in Genesis is a desire for experience. And if it weren't for that desire, Adam and Eve would never have gotten out of the garden. So it has nothing to do with anything immoral. It's that impulse to experience the world. And it's in the world where we have the experiences that allow us to transcend those experiences and come to know God in the midst of those experiences. So yes, so the worldly experiences we have are illusion, but we take them to be real. Especially, does sickness have any power? No. It has no power unless we give it power. And the snake served a purpose because it gave us that impulse to manifest in a physical environment. It was God's desire, and so there had to be that snake. Now the snake in that passage I was referring to is confronting people with the illusion, which then takes away the pain caused by the snakes. And they were healed. Also, what I wanted to mention about magic and alchemy is that the gifts of the Magi, the three that brought gifts to the Christ child, were magicians. They were alchemists, and they came from northern Iran, or so it is said. And the essential oils of gold, and there is one, a liquid gold, frankincense, and myrrh were like alchemy. They were alchemy because there were 3 elements in each of them. One was to lift the awareness to a connection with the Creator. The second element was to delete the error thinking. And the third element was to restore the cells to normal functioning. And that was considered alchemy. So the living substance of God found in the plants and the trees was a form of alchemy that allowed us to transform. Before Jesus, Jesus gave the disciples instructions, the disciples who were not yet in that consciousness where they could say, pick up your bed and walk, he taught them to anoint with those sacred oils, and they healed many. This is found in Mark 1:15. So thanks for the question, Bob. I think maybe it was your phone that gave out. If anyone else has a question, 816-301-6304. I welcome all questions and comments. If you're interested more in this question of magic and alchemy, you can look at all the things that the Lord taught Moses. So this is found in chapter 4 of Exodus. The Lord said to Moses, "What is that in your hand?" He said, "A rod." And he said, "Cast it on the ground." So he cast it on the ground, and it became a serpent. And Moses fled from it. Okay, he was afraid of it. But the Lord said to Moses, "Put out your hand and take it by the tail." All right, the tail. So he put out his hand and caught it, and it became a rod in his hand. So you can kind of grab that thing that you fear. You grab it, and then it turns into power. We can convert fear into true spiritual power by facing it, by incorporating it, by using it as our spiritual power. So this is in chapter 4. This is the instructions that were given. And then the Lord said to Moses, "Put your hand into your bosom." And he put his hand into his bosom, and when he took it out, behold, his hand was leprous, as white as snow. Then God said, "Put your hand back." So he put his hand back into his bosom, and when he took it out, behold, it was restored like the rest of his flesh. If they will not believe you, God said, or heed the first sign, they may believe the latter sign. You shall take some water from the Nile and pour it upon the dry grounds, and the water which you shall take from the Nile will become blood upon the dry ground. All right, so here he's telling Moses how to frighten with the plagues. All right, frighten. That's a preview of one of the plagues that he gives to Pharaoh. So there's much more we could say about magic and alchemy, but we are all alchemists in our world. But we have to learn to connect to the source. We have to have an understanding of the principles. And it's so helpful in the Bible because that's where we gain an understanding of the principles which play out in spiritual law that lies behind every single passage. As a well-known Bible teacher from Princeton said, the Bible is all music and no noise. Every single number, every single chapter and verse number is significant, but you have to learn how to interpret them. And so we've had a lesson in 4 and 40. Think of all the 4s and 40s in the Bible that you already know. 40 days and 40 nights, it rained, the flood. That was as much time as it took to purify the world. All right. Noah was on the ark 40 days and 40 nights before it was purified enough. Okay, what else? 40 days. Jesus spent 40 days in the wilderness as preparation for his ministry, whereas it took Moses 40 years in Horeb to prepare for his ministry. Okay, always we see 40s, and when we see that, we know that it's not so much a measure of time. It's not the measure, it's not a calendar or a measure of volume. It's simply a phase of preparation necessary for the next step of growth. Always chapter 1 is references the divine. Right? Oh. Hi, Bob. Hi, Bob.
Hello?
Yes, hi. Hi.
I was wondering, in relation to the magic again, can you elaborate a little more? I was parting the Red Sea. Would you consider that part of the magic that he learned?
Oh, sure. Yes. So the Red Sea we find in the call keeps going out, but my phone is functioning. So in chapter 12, it's actually chapter 13. They're coming up to the Red Sea. Here they all are. And the first man who walks into the water is named Nahshon ben Amminadab. All right, Nahshon ben Amminadab. He was the first one to walk into the Red Sea. And he walked, and nothing happened. He walked up to his knees, the waters did not part. He walked up to his waist, the waters did not part. He walked up to his chest, the waters did not part. He got all the way up to his nostrils before the water parted. That is in one of the Jewish commentaries. But for Moses, he's being told to lift up his rod. And this is a very famous and important line, and it's found in chapter 14, verse 13. And Moses said to the people, this is when Pharaoh has come galloping up with all his horses and weapons and so on. And Moses said to the people, "Fear not, stand firm, and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will work for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall never see again. The Lord will fight for you, and you have only to be still." The Lord said to Moses, "Why do you cry to me? Tell the people of Israel to go forward. Lift up your rod and stretch out your hand over the sea and divide it, that the people of Israel may go on dry ground through the sea. And I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians." But first of all, that line, fear not, okay? Let go of your fear. Stand firm and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will work for you today. In other words, it's not you doing it. It is God working in and through you that is doing the alchemy. The Egyptians you will never see again. All right, once you cross over the Red Sea, you're in another state of consciousness, and those Egyptians are gone. The remnants of that previous state are gone. The Lord said, "Why do you cry to me?" Don't we still do a little bit of begging to God to make things happen for us? He says, "Tell the people to go forward." And that's when Nahshon ben Amminadab, the first one into the Red Sea, what kind of faith do you have to have when you're up to your nostrils in water before the sea parts? And then again, if you saw the movie, you see that when Moses puts out his rod, that's his authority, his hand, the organ of action, it makes the sea part. There's a footnote here that says it really wasn't the Red Sea, it was the Sea of Reeds. But just know that all of the obstacles you could ever think of, limitation, that is what the Red Sea represents. All the obstacles that we face in human consciousness come up to be eliminated, so that we can have an understanding of the law. And already Moses is supposed to tell the people, hey, get going, you follow the guidance. And so they do. And it says, following that, "And I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians, so that they shall go in after them, and I will glory over Pharaoh and all his host, his chariots, and his horsemen. And the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord, when I have gotten glory over Pharaoh, his chariots, and his horsemen." Okay, so this is moving out of the subconscious, which Egypt represents. So the subconscious is no longer going to direct our thinking, have power over our decisions, have power over our actions. The subconscious, which keeps us in fear because of past memories and past experiences. So again, I hope you were able to hear this, Bob, but that's chapter 14, starting with verse 13. The people are already beginning to complain, and here's what they're saying. "When Pharaoh drew near, the people of Israel lifted up their eyes. Good evening.
Hi, Eleanor. I'm sorry for interrupting.
That's okay.
I think the reference you wanted on the bronze serpent is in Numbers chapter 21, verses 6 through 9.
Thank you so much. Okay. Thank you for looking that up.
Okay.
All right.
Okay. You're welcome. Bye. Good night.
Good night. So here, so this is before Moses lifts up his rod. The people are already complaining, and they're saying, is it because there are no graves in Egypt that you have taken us away to die in the wilderness? What have you done to us in bringing us out of Egypt? Moses has one difficult journey, and right up to the point here, they've been liberated, and they are saying, they still think they're going to die. We get so used to living in a place of limitation, thinking that things cannot happen for us, have all these doubts that prevent us from moving forward, and the resistance to change that brings about sickness and suffering. We have completed our time tonight. Thank you for the questions. Thank you for your answer about the bronze snakes. And so let's take a moment to close our eyes once again and reflect upon our own spiritual journey. Take a moment in the silence to release and to firm up our resolve for the next stage of growth. And we are thankful for the consciousness of all those participating in this class, for all are interested in growing into their inherent spiritual nature to its fullest expression. Amen. We do our classes for a love offering, so I invite you to hold your love offering in your hand, bless it with an awareness that the source is infinite. That infinite substance, that one source, one infinite substance is always flowing to, through, and around us. And as we send our gifts forth, we bless them with our offertory statement, divine love through me blesses and multiplies all the good I give and all the good I receive. And we are so grateful. So next week, we're going to go into the wilderness and see Moses on the third phase of his spiritual journey. So from the Red Sea up to the edge of the Promised Land. And I'll see you all in cyberspace next week. Thank you and good night. God bless you all.